privilege to bear during so much of my life and duty.
I think he'll change. He is committed of his own level of service, and that will remain true.
Something massive is brewing at Buckingham Palace, and the rumours are spreading fast. King Charles has finally had enough, but what in the world does that really mean? It means reports are flooding in, hinting at an abdication that's rocking the royal family to its core, while the palace scrambles into full-on damage control. Is this really the moment that changes it all for King Charles? Or is there a deeper, darker twist waiting in the wings to be uncovered? Uncovered. Join us as we dig into what happens when King Charles actually resigns. A monarchy is shattered and the whole world just freezes for a moment. On that quiet February morning, 2 simple words, "I resign," escaped King Charles's lips, and they shook the royal family like a powerful earthquake, breaking everything. Traditions that had stood firm for hundreds of years were shattered. Absolutely no one saw it coming, not the royal experts who had followed Charles's entire life, not the British people. The very people who had only just begun calling him their king. Not even the most seasoned journalists who usually predict royal decisions long before they happen. The news hit like a lightning strike on a clear day. In over 1,000 years of the monarchy, no strong and capable ruler had ever just stepped down by choice. Charles had waited longer than anyone in British history to become king, more than 70 years, while his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, led the nation. He had spent his entire life learning the ancient rules, perfecting every royal duty, and meticulously planning his time on the throne. And then, just as his reign truly started, he walked away. All up, television screens across the globe played the same moment over and over, Charles standing before the cameras at Buckingham Palace, looking exhausted but completely sure of himself. Inside the palace, total chaos was breaking out. Royal staff, caught completely off guard, scrambled frantically to figure out what was going to happen next. Phone calls between government offices flew back and forth one after another, packed with urgent questions that nobody could answer. All the carefully planned royal events were suddenly meaningless. Out on the streets of London, crowds gathered in pure shock, staring at their phones, while some whispered and some began to argue. Some argued and some wiped away tears. Many just stood completely still, struggling to process what this meant for a country where the monarchy had always been the one steady thing in a constantly changing world. The questions flew faster than the answers. Was Charles unwell? Was there some hidden crisis nobody knew about? The palace, however, remained completely silent, offering absolutely no explanation beyond that brief statement Charles had read. For Prince William, everything changed in a single heartbeat. The future that he had been preparing for his entire life had suddenly arrived with absolutely no warning. The heavy crown, which he expected to inherit many years from now waited for him immediately. Cameras quickly captured his extremely tense expression as he drove through the palace gates, a man suddenly facing a destiny he thought was still decades away. Within an hour, Prime Minister Harris called for an emergency cabinet meeting. Experts on royal law were urgently called in to explain a situation nobody had ever even imagined planning for. The last time a British king had stepped down Edward VIII in the year 1936, it had been for love, not by choice. The royal family built on tradition and lifelong. Duty now faced its greatest challenge in modern history. It wasn't because of some huge scandal or a public uprising, but because of 3 simple, unexpected words from a king, who had simply decided he'd had enough. As the palace gates swung shut after Charles's stunning announcement, it really begs the question, what pushed a man who had spent his whole life preparing to be king to finally turn his back and walk away? He was living in his mother's shadow. From the moment Charles took his very first breath inside Buckingham Palace, his life was never really his own to live. The nurses who placed him gently in his mother's arms weren't just handing over a newborn baby, they were presenting Britons. future. He was a child bound by duty from the very beginning. His childhood was so far from ordinary. While other boys his age ran through fields, climbed trees and came home with scraped knees and dirt-streaked faces, Charles was being taught the difficult art of stillness. From a very young age he stood for hours at royal ceremonies, mastering the difficult skill of remaining perfectly composed under the watchful eyes of dignitaries and the ever-present public. Every single step he took, every word he spoke, every single gesture he made was carefully moulded to reflect the enormous responsibility that would one day land squarely on his shoulders. There was simply no room for childhood whims or carefree laughter. There was only disciplined duty and the constant crushing expectations of the monarchy. At school he was surrounded by other boys who lived, without the weight of a future throne pressing down on their shoulders. They could play rough speak freely and just be themselves without any real consequences. But Charles was different. His posture was just a little too straight, his speech was too measured, and his habits were far too refined. While his own classmates were enjoying the simple joys of youth, he was already being shaped into a future ruler. Charles grew up watching Queen Elizabeth II lead the nation with unshakable dedication. For 70 years she ruled, with amazing grace, never once showing weakness and never ever stepping away from her duty. To the entire world she was the perfect queen, and no matter how hard Charles tried, he could never quite live up to the incredible image she left behind. Every single move he made, every choice he took was instantly compared to hers, and he always felt like he came up short. His personal life only added to the intense struggle. What started out as a fairy tale marriage to Diana famously turned into a very public and devastating heartbreak, while she completely captured the hearts and love of the people he was almost always painted as the story's villain. The criticism was non-stop, and the blame never seemed to fade away. Even as time went on and the public slowly began to warm to him again, the constant comparisons to Diana never truly disappeared. When he finally became king at 73, Charles took on a monumental role that had already been perfectly mastered by someone else. He gave it his absolute all, handling endless responsibilities and signing massive stacks of documents each and every day, attending countless ceremonies and managing the intense demands of royal life. But no matter how much incredible effort he put in, he knew one thing would never ever change. He would forever be compared to his mother, and her towering legacy would always overshadow anything he did. In the end, it wasn't because he wasn't ready. It was the unbearable pressure of trying to live up to a standard that no one on earth could ever truly match. As Charles carried the weight of his mother's legacy, his decision did much more than just unsettle the throne. It sent massive shockwaves through a family already on incredibly fragile ground. A family that was built on tradition and unity is now fractured and divided. Will, duty, and personal loyalties pull them apart. The royal family was now in crisis. The morning after King Charles abdicated, the royal residences felt fundamentally different. All the usual sounds of palace life, the quiet footsteps in the halls, the polite morning greetings, the carefully followed routines, were completely gone. In their place was just a heavy, tense silence, broken only by whispered phone calls behind closed doors. Palace staff who had seen decades of royal transitions found this moment deeply unsettling. This wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of heavy silence that happens when trust between family members has vanished. Prince William arrived at dawn, his face completely unreadable as security cameras caught him stepping out of his car. Minutes later, Catherine joined him, always so calm in public, but that morning even she looked shaken. They shut themselves inside the East Wing while royal aides waited nervously outside with stacks of urgent paperwork piling up. The burden that had weighed on his father now landed squarely on William without any warning. At 43, he had expected many more years before taking the throne. His life had been meticulously planned, balancing royal duties with raising his 3 children. Overnight, that entire plan was gone. William had worked so hard to be a hands-on parent, making time for school events and soccer games, but the Crown demands complete attention. His children would now see him more on the news than at home. Across the ocean, Prince Harry got the news while having breakfast in California. His phone lit up instantly, not with messages from family, but from reporters hunting for a reaction. The physical distance between him and the royal family was already vast, but now it felt impossible to cross. Harry faced a true no-win situation. If he spoke in support of his father, critics would call it insincere. If he stayed silent, they would say he had abandoned his family in their time of crisis. No matter what he did, the headlines would just write their own story. The once inseparable brothers now lived in different worlds, and William had no choice but to prepare for his new role, immediately cancelling all his personal plans. Harry, watching from thousands of miles away, said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. On the streets of London, people gathered outside Buckingham Palace. At first, everyone was just in shock, and then the opinions split. Some held signs thanking Charles for his honesty, while others carried messages demanding that duty must come before personal choice. For many, the monarchy had always been a symbol of stability, and now that symbol felt completely broken. Some saw it as a betrayal, others thought it was a long overdue change. Inside the palace, Queen Camilla moved through the halls quietly, avoiding the press. She had spent decades standing by Charles, enduring years of criticism and rejection, just to be with him. Now, with his departure, her own role became uncertain. She was no longer just his wife, nor fully queen. She was something in between, something history had never quite defined. Princess Anne, Charles's sister, arrived later in the afternoon by helicopter. She walked straight past reporters, without a word, her face completely serious. As the only family member with military service, she understood duty in a way few others did. Her presence made it clear. She was there to support William as the transition began. A monarchy that had lasted for 1,000 years, built on tradition and stability, was suddenly at risk. With its leader stepping away by choice, could it adapt and survive? Or was this the beginning of the end, modernization or decline? The morning after King Charles stepped down, Britain woke up to a nation that was forever changed. In the Tower of London, the golden crown sat untouched behind, bulletproof glass, its jewels shining as they had for centuries. But the monarchy it symbolised had shifted overnight, leaving only uncertainty in its place. Inside Windsor Castle, portraits of kings and queens from the past 1,000 years lined the walls, each ruler a link in an unbroken chain. Now, for the first time, that chain had a break, not from war scandal or crisis, but by choice. For centuries, the monarchy had rested on one simple belief: duty before self. A king, ruled until death, never stepping away. That belief had been shattered. The question was no longer just about who would take the throne. It was whether. The throne itself still mattered. In Parliament, urgent discussions took place behind closed doors. The monarchy's role had always been more symbolic than political, but symbols carry incredible weight. If a king could simply walk away, what did that mean for the stability of the institution across the country? University lecture halls filled with students questioning whether a system built in medieval times really had a place in the modern world. Trust in institutions had already been falling for years. Now, many young people saw this as proof that the monarchy was just another tradition that no longer fit. Even in the middle of the crisis, some people still defended the monarchy. Business leaders said it brought in money from tourism and gave Britain global recognition. Community leaders believed it could help bring people together in a time when the country felt divided. Others argued that the monarchy could still have a place in modern Britain, but only if it was willing to actually change with the times. At Buckingham Palace, staff worked, frantically behind the scenes. For 12 hours, the royal family's social media accounts went completely silent. Then they reappeared with carefully chosen images of Prince William meeting with the public, a quiet message of continuity. Behind the palace doors, advisers weighed the future. The monarchy had reached a turning point. It could either evolve to fit a changing world or risk becoming a relic of the past. As the monarchy stands at a crossroads, between old traditions and necessary change, everyone now focuses on one person, the heir who never wanted this moment. How would a man who never thought he would rule so soon shape the meaning of kingship for a new generation? The prince who would be king, Prince William, walked through the quiet halls of Kensington Palace like a man lost in a dream. The soft carpet silenced his steps as he passed the portraits of past kings' men who had taken the crown with the certainty that it was their destiny. But none had inherited it like this through abdication instead of death by choice, instead of fate. For years his path to the throne had been carefully planned, a slow and steady journey of increasing responsibility. He was meant to have decades to prepare. Instead, everything changed overnight. In the royal nursery, his 3 children felt the shift. Prince George, only 11, years old now, carried a heavier burden. The carefree days of playing football and going to school like any other child were fading. He was no longer just a prince. He was the next in line, a future king whose life had just been set on a much faster course. William, who had worked so hard to give his children a childhood as close to normal as possible, now found that effort slipping away. The resignation of his father had changed everything, shattering the careful balance he and Catherine had built was gone, replaced by the crushing reality of their new roles. Even his appearance began to shift. The casual clothes he once wore were gone, replaced by formal suits. His way of speaking grew more precise, his words carefully selected, and that easy warmth that made him so popular just seemed to fade, replaced by a more serious and reserved presence. At his first Privy Council meeting, he sat surrounded by senior officials. His hands shook slightly while he signed documents that confirmed the transition, but those in the room noticed his steady focus and his quiet but firm presence. The weight of the crown hadn't yet settled on his head, but it was already pressing down on him. Across Britain, people reacted in very different ways. Some saw William as a symbol of hope, a leader who could modernise the monarchy while still respecting its traditions. Others wondered if he really had the strength to carry the burden, fearing the role would change him just as it had changed so many before him. At Buckingham Palace, William made a small but significant choice. He moved his office not to the Grand King's workspace, but into a smaller room overlooking the gardens where he used to walk with his mother. He knew what this role had done to his family. His parents' marriage was torn apart by it, and his father had struggled under its demands before finally walking away. Now, much sooner than anyone expected, it was his turn. As he prepared for his first speech to the nation, the question wasn't if he could do the job. A lifetime of training had prepared him for that. The real question was whether the job would allow him to stay the man he had always been with, William trying to come to terms with a crown he never expected so soon. The impact of Charles's decision spread far beyond Britain. If even one of its oldest institutions could change so, suddenly what else might follow? The ripple effect was immediate. In the quiet halls of the United Nations, diplomats exchanged uneasy glances. The news from Britain had arrived like an unexpected storm, shaking the very foundations of protocol and forcing urgent discussions about the future of international diplomacy. King Charles's decision shook governments all around the world. In Spain, King Felipe VI cancelled public events and held urgent talks with his top advisers. In Sweden, the royal palace said absolutely nothing, but the silence itself sent a powerful message. In Denmark, Queen Margrethe walked out of an emergency council meeting, her face showing clear concern, something the public had rarely ever seen from her. The impact stretched far beyond Europe. In China, President Chen ordered a review of the economic impact on trade with Britain. The White House released a cautious statement offering support for the British people, but it made no mention of the monarchy itself. For Commonwealth nations, the reaction was even stronger. In Australia, Republican groups quickly launched campaigns arguing that if a king could just step away from the throne, countries should be able to step away from the monarchy. In Jamaica, lawmakers called for immediate discussions on whether it was time to remove the British monarch as head of state. Tourist destinations also felt the shift. Thailand's tourism officials worried that fewer British visitors might arrive since their fascination with their own royal family often extended to others. Japan's Imperial Household Agency instantly increased. Security fully aware that interest in monarchies worldwide had suddenly become intense. Social media only fueled the debate. In Brazil, trending topics linked Charles's decision to intense discussions about colonial history. In Indonesia, royal influences faced tough questions about their relevance in today's world. Across the entire globe, people debated what this moment meant, not just for Britain, but for monarchies everywhere. The diplomatic impact was immediate. Charles had played a key role in global environmental efforts, using his unique influence to unite different viewpoints. Now, climate conference organisers scrambled to fill the massive gap. Conservation programs in Africa faced deep uncertainty as royal patronages came into question. Security experts also took notice. Intelligence agencies quietly analysed whether rival nations might try to take advantage of Britain's moment of transition. Defence officials re-examined their alliances, questioning if traditional diplomatic ties would remain strong during this period of change. Inside royal palaces, from Thailand to Jordan, rulers born into power thought about what this truly meant. A king had given up his throne not because of a scandal or a revolution, but by his own choice. The exact same question ran through royal halls everywhere: if a monarch could simply step down what was left of the centuries-old tradition that made them different from everyone else. What happens to a king's legacy when his time on the throne is just a short pause between the rulers who came before and after him? This was Charles's abbreviated legacy. Curators at the British Museum's Royal Archive worked with unusual urgency, completely unsure how to categorise items, from a reign that ended almost as soon as it had begun. In an artist's studio, a half-finished portrait of King Charles III sat untouched. The background was carefully painted, but his eyes remained blank, a fitting symbol of a kingship that never had the chance to fully take shape. Charles had spent more than 70 years preparing for the throne, only to step away after a short time. Historians now faced a difficult question: how does one measure the legacy of a king whose greatest ambitions were left unfinished inside Windsor Castle staff quietly packed up personal items from the king's study books with notes scribbled in the margins, reports on environmental issues marked with his handwritten thoughts, and speeches that would now never be spoken. Every item held a reminder of plans that would never be finished. At climate summits around the world, empty chairs will be a constant reminder of the man who had spent years urging leaders to finally take action. Charles had used his royal position to bring scientists and politicians together, turning ceremony into real change. But with his resignation, that influence disappeared almost instantly. For many people, his departure left a sense of pure confusion. A young girl who had once given Charles flowers during a hospital visit now held a framed photo, unsure how something so recent could already feel like it was from the distant past. At Westminster Abbey, tourists stopped at his coronation marker while guides struggled to explain a reign that was over almost as soon as it began. Even historians found it hard to place Charles in the royal timeline. British kings and queens were usually remembered for what they did while ruling, but Charles would be known for the choice to step down. His decision went against centuries of tradition leaving a gap in the history books. Meanwhile, plans for William's coronation were suddenly racing ahead much faster than anyone had anticipated. Palace insiders claimed he wanted a much simpler ceremony, perhaps knowing that a huge celebration would only remind people of the scandal his father left behind. As for Charles, those who saw him at his private estate noticed a man who seemed both relieved and lost deep in thought as he wandered. Walking through the gardens of Highgrove, he looked free but also uncertain, a man who'd spent his whole life preparing for a role he just decided to give up. In the end, Charles III's time as king might be remembered not for his deeds, but for what he proved that even the oldest traditions have to break eventually. Is this the moment that reshapes the monarchy's future for good, or is it the first major sign of its inevitable decline? Share your thoughts down below. And remember to like, share and subscribe for more updates. Also click the next video on your screen right now, you won't want to miss it.